Welcome to Wyrd Sisters, a Discworld deep dive. In the misty, magic-laden kingdom of Lancre, fate is tangled in the hands of three witches: Granny Weatherwax, sharp as steel; Nanny Og, bawdy and wise; and Magrat Garlic, full of youthful ideals. A murdered king, a stolen heir, and a tyrant rewriting history, all set the stage for a battle not of swords, but of wit, magic, and storytelling itself. Terry Pratchett's Wyrd Sisters isn't just a parody of Shakespearean drama. It's a tale of power, fate, and the way history is shaped by those who tell it. Here, the very fabric of reality bends to belief. Theater becomes a weapon, and time itself can be adjusted. Expect humor, satire, and sharp philosophical insight as we unravel this spellbinding tale. Join us as we journey through the foggy hills of Lancre, where witches don't rule, but they do make sure the right king ends up on the throne.
All right, so are you ready to take a deep dive into Terry Pratchett's Wyrd Sisters?
Always up for a bit of Discworld.
We're going to be focusing on those big themes he always weaves in so well, fate, power,
And how stories can actually shape reality.
Exactly. And we've got some juicy excerpts from the novel itself to really get into it. Let me tell you, things get wild right off the bat. Regicide.
A power-hungry Duke and Duchess and a missing heir raised by, wait for it, a troupe of actors.
Yeah, buckle up, because we're going to explore how the witches of Lancre deal with a kingdom turned upside down.
It's fascinating how Pratchett just throws us right into the action. The murder of King Varence I. But it's not your typical death scene, is it?
No, not at all.
I mean, King Varence meets death himself, and he's not even angry. More like, annoyed that he's going to be missing out on all those earthly pleasures.
Yeah, can you imagine?
He's worried about missing a good hunt or a plate of kidneys. Death even points out that fate and destiny, they leave the messy business of dying to him.
Wow. It really sets the tone for how humans, even kings, deal with these big cosmic forces.
It does, doesn't it?
And then, boom, right after that, we're introduced to the iconic witches of Lancre: Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Og, and Magrat Garlic. Now, they each have such unique personalities and approaches to witchcraft.
Oh, absolutely. You've got Granny Weatherwax, incredibly powerful, but prefers not to interfere in human affairs.
Right.
Then there's Nanny Og, so down to earth, connected to the community. And then you've got Magrat, the youngest, she's still figuring out her place in the world of witchcraft.
Yeah, that really comes out when they encounter the fleeing servant with the infant heir.
Tom John,
right?
Oh, definitely. At first, Granny wants nothing to do with it. Let things run their course. That's her motto, right?
Right.
But then she uses, what do we call it? Headology.
Headology, yeah, to disarm that soldier who's chasing them.
It's subtle magic, but so effective.
Yeah.
And it shows that conflict within her. Now,
Yeah.
She wants to stay out of it, but she also can't stand to see innocent people suffer.
Yeah, it's that classic Granny Weatherwax dilemma. For those who haven't read Wyrd Sisters yet, headology is basically Granny's way of using psychology to nudge people in a certain direction.
It's brilliant, really.
So what happens next? They can't just leave a baby out on the heath.
Well, they make the decision to entrust the heir to a traveling theater troupe.
A theater troupe?
Yes, led by this fellow named Vipalar, and Granny makes sure they're financially taken care of, which, is a detail some people might overlook, but it really says a lot about her character.
Yeah, for sure. It shows that even though she doesn't want to get involved, she still cares.
Right. And it's not just a convenient hiding place. Tom Deston being raised by actors, it ends up shaping how he sees the world.
That's one of the things I love about Wyrd Sisters. Pratchett's showing us how those stories we absorb, literally in Tom's case, become our reality.
It's like he's saying that reality itself is a kind of performance.
Mind-blowing, isn't it? Meanwhile, back at the castle, Duke Filmont and the Duchess have taken over. And they're not your typical fairy tale villains.
No, not at all. What's interesting is their obsession with controlling the narrative, rewriting history to make their rules seem, legitimate.
Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? That happens in our world, too.
All the time.
The Duchess is especially interesting, right? This force of nature, completely pragmatic, ruthless. We see that when she's berating the Duke for letting the heir escape.
For not solidifying his power.
Right. It's all about image and control for her.
Absolutely. And she totally underestimates the witches, dismisses them as irrelevant.
But the witches, they understand a kind of power that's beyond politics and brute force.
Precisely. They represent those unseen forces that even someone as cunning as the Duchess can't fully grasp.
And speaking of unseen things, Granny Weatherwax starts to sense that something's off in Lancre.
It's more than just the people suffering under Felmet's rule. There's something deeper going on, like the land itself is rejecting him.
You know, that's where Pratchett's world building really shines. Lancre isn't just a setting, it's a character in itself.
It has this deep connection to its rightful ruler, and it's yearning for a king who cares for it, not just for the power of the throne.
But Granny wants to stay out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Non-interference is like her motto.
True, but she's struggling with that. She can feel the land's anger, see the kingdom's plight, but it goes against everything she believes in to meddle in human affairs.
So what's Granny gonna do? And how does a boy raised by actors fit into all of this?
Well, for that, we need to dive a bit deeper into how stories shape reality in Wyrd Sisters. And then Pratchett throws another character into the mix, the Fool.
Right.
He's connected to the witches.
Okay.
And he desperately wants Tom John to, to take his place on the throne.
Yeah, he's definitely not your typical jester, is he? There's like a depth to him and even a kind of sadness.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And of course, we've got to mention Magratte's growing feelings for him.
Oh, absolutely.
But I thought it was really interesting how he kind of represents the opposite of the Duke and Duchess.
Oh, how so?
Well, they're all about control, right?
Right.
But the Fool, he spent all this time in the Ankh-Morpork Fools Guild, which is all about rules and structure,
Mm-hmm.
And he just craves genuine laughter, something unscripted and free.
That's a great point, yeah.
He sees that Tom John has the potential to be a good king. And he's willing to take some risks to make that happen.
Yeah, he really puts himself out there.
Yeah, which brings us to his plan to get the Duke to banish the riches. He thinks he'll pave the way for Tom John to come back and claim the throne.
Right.
But that leads to the confrontation with the Duchess, and wow, that scene is so tense.
Oh, it's so good, isn't it? The Duchess is so focused on keeping up appearances, and then Nanny-Og just throws everything into chaos by using the ghost of King Virence to expose the Duke's crime.
That was some quick thinking on Nanny's part.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a real turning point, because suddenly the Duchess loses control of the narrative that she's so carefully been constructing.
Exactly. And it's at this point that Granny Weatherwax realizes that she can't just sit back and watch anymore. So she does something pretty extraordinary. She manipulates time.
Wait, she can actually control time.
That's the beauty of Pratchett, right? He takes these fantastical ideas and grounds them in the very human struggles of his characters.
Yeah.
So Granny's control of time, it's not just some cool magical trick. It's about her inner conflict, that desire for non-interference, battling against the need to set things right.
It makes me wonder about those 15 years that are missing for everyone in Lancre because of the time distortion.
Oh, right, yeah.
Does that ever get addressed?
It does, yeah. After everything is resolved and Tom Sound's back on the throne, the witches, they reverse the time distortion and restore those missing years to everyone.
Wow, so they basically just give everyone back that lost time.
They do, yeah.
That's incredible.
It's a small detail, but it really speaks volumes about their sense of responsibility and their love for Lancre,
It's like time is as malleable as a story in the hands of a powerful witch.
Oh, exactly.
So you mentioned earlier that Tom John being raised by actors would have a big impact on him.
Oh, yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Well, remember how he encounters those bandits on the way back to Lancre?
Uh-huh.
Instead of being robbed, he gives this grand dramatic speech.
Oh, yeah.
Expecting a reward.
Right.
And the bandits, they're completely charmed.
Instead of robbing him, they just let him go.
They do.
That's hilarious and a little bit mind-boggling.
It is, isn't it? He basically charmed them with his performance.
He really did. So his belief in the story in theater, it actually shaped reality.
It did. And it goes even further than that. While he's rehearsing lines for a play, he accidentally summons Death.
Oh, yeah, I remember that scene. Didn't Death say something about, like, everyone has a part to play and the play must go on?
Yes. It's like the story itself, the narrative of Wyrd Sisters is conspiring to bring about a resolution.
Wow.
Death makes sure that the play, which, mirrors the events happening in Lancre, that it proceeds in a way that will lead to the Duke and Duchess's downfall.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's like layers upon layers of storytelling.
It is, isn't it?
So then we get to that amazing climax at the theater.
Yes.
And the play becomes this kind of microcosm of the whole struggle for Lancre.
Right.
And Tom John, without even realizing it, he's channeling magic through his performance, and it's blurring the lines between fiction and reality.
Yeah, it's all building to this incredible moment of truth.
It really is, yeah. So how does their downfall happen? It's not a typical battle scene, right?
Yeah, no, it's much more, it's more subtle, more symbolic.
Okay.
The play, which is about, a rightful heir reclaiming his throne, it resonates so powerfully with the audience that it fuels their belief in Tom John. And that collective belief, combined with the witch's manipulations behind the scenes, it weakens the Duke and Duchess's hold on power. They try to control everything, to force their own narrative.
But it backfires.
It does. Their downfall isn't about physical force, it's about the power of a shared story, a collective belief in what's right. It's a really powerful message about how stories can shape reality.
It really makes you think about the stories we tell and the stories that we choose to believe.
It does, doesn't it? And that's something we'll unpack a bit more when we talk about what happens after the Duke and Duchess are gone and what becomes of Tom John and the witches. So the Duke and Duchess are gone, their attempt to rewrite history has failed, and Tom John, the boy raised by actors, is now King Virenz II.
But does he want to be king?
That's a great question, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
He hesitates. He'd rather be back on the road with the theater troupe.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it makes you think about what it really means to be a leader, doesn't it? The weight of that crown, especially for someone who never actually wanted power.
Yeah, it's such a contrast to the Duke and Duchess, who were so obsessed with power and control.
Exactly. Tom John is almost reluctant, even though he's the rightful heir.
It speaks to that theme that runs throughout Wyrd Sisters, that difference between ruling and guiding.
Oh, right.
The Duke and Duchess, they wanted to rule through fear and manipulation, but true leadership, like what the witches embody, it's about guiding, about using your wisdom and experience to nurture and protect.
Yeah, and speaking of the witches, what happens to them after Tom John is back on the throne?
Well, they decide to stay in Lancre.
They do. I would thought they'd be happy to go back to their cottage and, just live their lives.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But they recognize that they have a responsibility to Lancre, especially with a young, inexperienced king.
Right, like their duty goes beyond non-interference.
Exactly. They find that balance between their desire to stay out of human affairs and their duty to protect the land and its people.
So they've embraced the idea that they have a part to play.
They have, yeah, even if it's behind the scenes.
And their decision to stay also shows how interconnected everything is, right? The witches, the land, the people, even the stories they tell, it's all woven together.
It is, yeah.
What affects one affects them all.
Absolutely.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about how the land itself was rejecting Duke Filmet.
Oh, right.
Lancre isn't just a setting, it's like a living, breathing entity.
It reacts to those who rule it.
Yeah, and it's through the witches that we see this connection so clearly, because they can sense the land, can't they?
They can sense its moods, its needs, its anger.
It makes me think about how we treat our own environment,
Yeah.
We forget that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about Pratchett. He can take these fantastical scenarios and weave in these profound truths about, about human nature, about our place in the world.
It all comes back to that question we asked at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Can stories actually shape reality? And after this deep dive into Wyrd Sisters, I think the answer is a resounding yes.
I think so too. Wyrd Sisters really shows us that narratives have real-world consequences. The stories we tell, the stories we believe, they shape our actions, our beliefs, even the course of history.
It's like a reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping the narrative, both our own personal stories and the bigger stories that define our world.
And sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we don't even realize we're telling.
The ones that are just woven into the fabric of our lives.
Exactly.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into Wyrd Sisters has taken us on quite a journey, hasn't it? Regicide, rebellion, and the power of stories.
We've seen how fate and power and storytelling, they all come together to create a world that's both fantastical and deeply relevant to our own lives.
We've talked about leadership, about balance, interconnectedness, and the power of belief.
And if there's one thing we can all take away from this deep dive, it's that we all have a story to tell. A narrative that's uniquely ours, but also connected to the larger tapestry of life. So go out there and embrace your story, and maybe we can all find a little bit of Granny Weatherwax's wisdom, Nanny Ogg's heart, and McGrack Garlick's idealism in ourselves.
And until next time, keep those pages turning and those imaginations soaring. And remember, if you have a stack of sources you'd like us to take a deep dive into, send them our way. We'd love to explore them with you.